Something came up. We'll celebrate another time. My family texted one by one on the morning of my anniversary dinner. I ate alone, paid the bill, and remained silent. 3 hours later, I saw their selfies at my aunt's cat's birthday. That night, I canceled the rent transfer, severed the utilities, and took the spare car key off the hook. I, 34M, stared at the restaurant reservation confirmation on my phone, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. 10 years. A decade of marriage deserved something special, and I'd spent weeks planning this anniversary dinner at the upscale Italian place downtown where we'd had our first date. The reservation was for 6 people: my wife, my parents, my brother, and my sister. Family meant everything to me, or so I thought. The morning started like any other, except for the flutter of anticipation in my chest. I'd taken the day off work to prepare, picking up flowers, getting the car detailed, even buying a new shirt. My wife had seemed distracted lately, but I chalked it up to work stress. She managed the local branch of a marketing firm and always had something urgent demanding her attention. The first text came at 11 a.m. from my mother. Something urgent had come up at work, she explained, and she couldn't make it to dinner. She promised we'd celebrate another time. I felt disappointed but understood. Mom had been the assistant manager at a retail store for 20 years and rarely called out. 20 minutes later, my father texted with a similar message. A client emergency at his accounting firm required his immediate attention. He apologized profusely and suggested we reschedule for the following weekend. My brother's excuse came next. His daughter had suddenly fallen ill, and he needed to take her to urgent care. As a single father, he had no choice but to prioritize his child. I respected that completely. When my sister canceled an hour later, claiming her boss had demanded she work late on a critical project, I started feeling suspicious. For separate emergencies on the same day seemed unlikely, but life had a way of throwing curveballs. My wife emerged from the bedroom looking gorgeous in the black dress I'd bought her for Christmas. She kissed my cheek and told me she was looking forward to our romantic evening together, just the two of us. Her smile seemed forced, but I pushed the nagging feeling aside. The restaurant was everything I'd hoped for. Soft lighting, excellent service, and the same corner table where we'd sat a decade ago when I'd nervously asked her to be my girlfriend. I'd even arranged for the staff to bring out a special dessert with a candle to commemorate our anniversary. But sitting across from my wife, watching her pick at her food while constantly checking her phone, I felt a growing emptiness. She claimed she was having stomach issues and barely touched the expensive meal I'd carefully selected. Our conversation felt stilted, like we were strangers making small talk. When the dessert arrived, she barely looked up from her phone. I made a comment about how this was supposed to be our special night, and she apologized distractedly, claiming work was demanding her attention even on our anniversary. The disappointment settled in my chest like a stone. I paid the considerable bill, nearly $300 for a meal that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration. Walking to the car, I tried to convince myself that everyone had legitimate reasons for canceling, that my wife's distraction was purely work-related. The drive home was quiet except for the sound of her typing on her phone. When I mentioned how disappointed I was that our families couldn't make it, she made a non-committal sound and continued texting. At home, I loosened my tie and decided to check social media while she disappeared into the bathroom. Instagram was usually mindless entertainment, but what I saw made my blood run cold. My sister had posted a selfie 3 hours earlier, right around the time she claimed to be working late. She was smiling broadly, surrounded by my parents, my brother, my aunt, and several other family members. They were gathered around a small white cat wearing a tiny party hat, with balloons and a miniature birthday cake visible in the background. The caption read, "Princess Whiskers turns 3 today? Thanks to Aunt Linda for hosting such a fun party. Family time is the best time." My hands started trembling as I scrolled through the comments. My mother had written about how adorable the decorations were. My father had posted laughing emojis. My brother had commented about how his daughter loved meeting the birthday cat. They had all lied to me, every single one of them. But the knife twisted deeper when I saw my wife's comment, posted just 2 hours earlier. "Sorry I missed it. Next time for sure," with several heart emojis. My wife hadn't been at the party, but she clearly knew about it. She had helped coordinate the lies, had sat across from me at dinner knowing exactly why our family couldn't attend our anniversary celebration. I sat in the darkness of our living room, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The secret of phone calls I'd overheard. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The sudden changes in family plans over the past few months. They didn't just forget about our anniversary. They had deliberately chosen my aunt's cat's birthday party over celebrating a decade of my marriage. And my wife had not only known about it, but had actively participated in the deception. I thought about all the times I'd supported these people. When my parents needed help with their mortgage payments 2 years ago, I'd given them $5,000 without question. When my brother was going through his divorce, I'd let him and his daughter stay in our guest room for 6 months, paying for groceries and helping with childcare. My sister had borrowed money for her car down payment, money she still hadn't repaid. I'd helped my aunt move 3 times in the past 5 years, spending entire weekends loading trucks and cleaning apartments. And my wife? I'd been supporting her through everything. When she wanted to go back to school for her MBA, I'd worked overtime to cover the tuition. When her mother was sick, I'd used all my vacation days to drive her back and forth to the hospital. I'd always been the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who sacrificed for family. Tonight, I realized how little that meant to them. I heard the shower running upstairs and opened my laptop. The financial accounts were all in my name. I'd handled the money management since we got married, as my wife preferred to focus on her career. The mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance. Everything. My fingers moved with surprising steadiness as I logged into the bank account. The automatic rent transfer to my brother was scheduled for tomorrow. He'd been living in a studio apartment I'd been paying for since his divorce, claiming he needed time to get back on his feet financially. I canceled the transfer. Then I canceled the recurring payment for the utilities at that apartment, and the car insurance for the vehicle he'd been driving. The car that was technically mine, but that I'd let him use indefinitely. Next, I accessed my parents' account where I'd been automatically transferring $200 monthly to help with their retirement expenses. Canceled. My sister's phone bill, which I'd been covering for the past year after she'd claimed financial hardship. Canceled. The family plan streaming services that everyone used. Canceled. I moved methodically through every account, every automatic payment, every financial support I'd been providing to people who couldn't be bothered to show up for my anniversary dinner but could attend a cat's birthday party. When I was finished, I walked to the kitchen and removed the spare car key from the hook by the door. My brother's transportation would be severely limited without it. The shower was still running. I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control over my own life. My phone started buzzing with notifications. My brother had texted asking if there was a problem with the rent payment. His landlord had called about a bounced automatic payment. I deleted the message without responding. My wife came downstairs in her pajamas, looking relaxed for the first time all evening. She asked if I'd had a good night despite the family cancellations, and I told her it had been very enlightening. She seemed puzzled by my tone, but didn't press further. Instead, she mentioned that she was tired and headed to bed early. I told her I'd be up later, that I had some things to think about. Alone again, I poured myself a glass of the expensive whiskey I'd been saving for special occasions. Tonight felt special indeed. Update 1. The next morning brought a symphony of confused and increasingly frantic phone calls. I let them all go to voicemail. My brother's message was bewildered. He couldn't understand why his rent hadn't gone through, why his utilities had been disconnected, why his car insurance had lapsed overnight. He asked if there had been some kind of banking error, and could I please call him back immediately. My parents called separately, both confused about why their account assistance had stopped. They wanted to know if everything was okay with my finances. My sister's message was shorter, but more demanding. She wanted to know why her phone service had been suspended and why she couldn't access the streaming accounts. I spent the morning calmly drinking coffee and listening to their growing panic through voicemail messages. Not once did any of them mention the anniversary dinner they'd missed or apologize for lying to me. My wife left for work with a kiss on the cheek and a comment about how quiet I was being. I told her I was just reflecting on recent events. She shrugged and reminded me that she'd be working late again. By afternoon, my brother had shown up at my office. He looked haggard and confused, explaining that he'd had to call in sick to work because he couldn't get his car started and the buses weren't running to his neighborhood due to construction. He asked what was happening with the payments, and I told him that I was reevaluating my financial commitments. When he pressed for details, I simply said that priorities change and left it at that. He mentioned that his landlord was threatening eviction if the rent wasn't paid within 48 hours, and I expressed sympathy for his difficult situation. I did not offer to help. The desperation in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. For years, I'd been his safety net, catching him every time he fell. Now he was learning what it felt like to fall without that net. My parents arrived at my house that evening, looking worried and confused. They explained that they'd been counting on my monthly assistance for their medication costs, and asked if there was some kind of family emergency that required me to cut off their support. I invited them in and served coffee in the good china. The wedding set my wife and I had registered for but rarely used. I told them that there hadn't been any emergency, that I simply had new priorities. When they asked what had changed, I pulled out my phone and showed them my sister's Instagram post from the previous night. I watched their faces as understanding dawned. My father tried to explain that the cat party had been planned months ago, that they hadn't realized it conflicted with our anniversary dinner. My mother added that they'd thought we wouldn't mind, that we could celebrate our anniversary anytime. I asked them how they thought it felt to eat alone at a restaurant where I'd made special arrangements to celebrate a decade of marriage, while my entire family was across town celebrating a pet's birthday. I asked them to imagine spending $300 on a meal that no one wanted to share with me. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, my mother said they were sorry, that they should have prioritized our anniversary. My father nodded and suggested we could all go out to dinner the following weekend to make up for it. I thanked them for the apology, but explained that the damage was already done. I told them that I'd spent years being the family's financial backup plan, the person everyone turned to when they needed help, but when I needed them to simply show up for one dinner, they chose a cat instead. My mother started crying, saying they didn't realize how much it meant to me. I responded that a 10-year wedding anniversary should have been obviously significant, and if they couldn't figure that out on their own, then we had bigger problems than missed dinners. They left that night without any resolution, my father promising they'd find a way to manage their expenses without my help. Update 2. 3 days later, my sister showed up at my house with fire in her eyes. She'd clearly been building up anger since her phone service was cut off, and she unleashed it all at once. She accused me of being petty and vindictive, of punishing the whole family over one missed dinner. She said I was acting like a spoiled child who couldn't handle disappointment. I let her vent completely before responding. Then I asked her if she thought Princess Whiskers appreciated the effort everyone put into her party. I asked if the cat understood the significance of having extended family drive across town to celebrate her birthday. My sister's anger wavered as she tried to follow my logic. I continued by asking if she thought a cat's birthday was more important than a human being's 10-year marriage anniversary. I asked if she'd considered how it would feel to be the only person sitting at a table reserved for 6. She tried to argue that family gatherings were different, that the cat party was just a fun, spontaneous thing. I reminded her that our anniversary date had been planned and confirmed weeks in advance, and that everyone had specifically committed to being there. The conversation grew heated when she accused me of trying to control the family through money. I explained that I wasn't trying to control anyone. I was simply withdrawing my financial support from people who had demonstrated that they didn't value my important life events. She demanded to know how long I planned to punish everyone, and I told her that it wasn't punishment, it was a permanent change. I explained that I'd been reevaluating all of my relationships and deciding where to invest my time, energy, and money. When she threatened to tell everyone in the family what a selfish person I was being, I encouraged her to go ahead. I suggested she might also mention why this situation started in the first place. She stormed out, but not before asking for money to pay her phone bill, so she could call our parents to discuss my behavior. I declined the request. That evening, my wife came home from another late night at work and found me reading on the couch. She mentioned that my sister had called her from a friend's phone, complaining about my recent behavior. My wife said my sister was worried about me, that cutting off financial support for the family seemed extreme. I asked my wife if she thought attending a cat's birthday party instead of our anniversary dinner was extreme. She looked uncomfortable and claimed she hadn't known the cat party was happening on our anniversary night. I reminded her of her Instagram comment expressing regret about missing it. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had in our 10 years of marriage. She admitted she'd known about the party, but said she'd chosen to come to dinner with me instead. When I pointed out that she'd seemed distracted and uninterested throughout the meal, she became defensive. I asked her directly if she'd rather have been at the cat party, and after a long pause, she said she probably would have had more fun there. The honesty was brutal, but somehow clarifying. I told her that I was glad she'd chosen to honor our anniversary dinner, even if she'd done so reluctantly. But I also told her that it hurt to know she'd felt obligated rather than excited to celebrate our marriage. She tried to backtrack, claiming that wasn't what she'd meant, but the damage was done. We both knew the truth now. Update 3. 2 weeks passed with minimal contact from my family. I'd heard through mutual friends that my brother had moved back in with our parents temporarily, that my sister was working extra shifts to cover her phone bill, and that everyone was struggling to adjust to managing their own finances. I felt no guilt about their situations. If anything, I felt liberated. The revelation came when my wife's phone buzzed during dinner one evening. She glanced at it and quickly turned it face down, but not before I caught a glimpse of a text from someone named Mike saying he missed her. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her phone. What I found explained everything about her distraction lately, her working late, her reluctance to engage in our anniversary celebration. Mike was a colleague from her company. Their text conversations going back months revealed an emotional affair that had clearly become physical. The night of our anniversary, while I was paying for an expensive dinner she didn't want to eat, she'd been texting him about how guilty she felt for not being at the cat party where he'd apparently been present as someone's plus one. She hadn't just known about choosing between our anniversary and the cat party. She'd known her affair partner would be at the party, and she'd been disappointed to miss the opportunity to see him. The next morning, I confronted her with the evidence. She broke down immediately, claiming it had just been an emotional connection that had gotten out of hand. She said she loved me and wanted to work on our marriage. I asked her how long she'd been in love with Mike, and she admitted it had been developing for over 6 months. I asked if she'd been thinking about him during our anniversary dinner, and she nodded through her tears. I told her that I was done, not just with the marriage, but with pretending that people's feelings toward me were different than their actions demonstrated. She begged for another chance, promising to end things with Mike and focus on rebuilding our relationship. I explained that the problem wasn't just the affair, it was the pattern of being treated as an option rather than a priority. My family had chosen a cat's birthday over my marriage anniversary. My wife had chosen an emotional affair over our actual marriage. Everyone had made their priorities clear through their actions, regardless of their words. The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks later. My wife moved in with Mike shortly after, confirming what I'd suspected about the depth of their relationship. My family attempted an intervention of sorts, with everyone gathering to express concern about my recent decisions. They wanted to know if I was having some kind of breakdown, if I needed professional help. I thanked them for their concern, but pointed out that this was the first family gathering I'd been invited to in months. I mentioned how interesting it was that they could coordinate their schedules to discuss my mental health, but hadn't been able to manage it for my anniversary dinner. My brother accused me of holding grudges and being unable to forgive. I corrected him by explaining that I'd forgiven everyone completely. I just wouldn't be financing their lives anymore while they treated me as an afterthought. My mother cried and said she missed the old me, the one who was always there for family. I told her that person still existed, but he'd learned to be more selective about who deserved his support. The family scattered after that intervention, and contact became sporadic. I heard updates occasionally. My brother had found a cheaper apartment and was slowly getting back on his feet financially. My sister had taken on a second job and was managing her bills independently. My parents had adjusted their lifestyle to match their actual retirement income. Everyone was surviving and even thriving in some ways. They'd all discovered capabilities they'd forgotten they had when I was always there to catch them. 6 months after that anniversary dinner, I sat in my newly quiet house and realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was grateful. The cat's birthday party had been a gift. It had shown me exactly where I stood in everyone's priorities. My wife's affair had been equally illuminating. These revelations had freed me from relationships that were draining my energy and resources without providing genuine connection or support in return. I'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued. My family had needed my financial support, but they hadn't valued my emotional needs. My wife had needed the security I provided, but she'd valued someone else's companionship. Now, at 34, I was starting over with a clear understanding of my worth and what I wanted in relationships. The loneliness I'd feared never materialized. Instead, I found peace in authenticity and freedom in setting boundaries. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept less than you deserve and walking away from people who don't appreciate what you bring to their lives. The restaurant where we'd had our anniversary dinner sent me a promotional email about their Valentine's Day specials. I deleted it without a second thought. I had no interest in celebrating artificial milestones with people who saw me as convenient rather than cherished. I was finally learning to be as selective about giving my love as others had been about receiving it.